Hello, this is Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast, and today I have a friend of mine and a special guest, and I have no problem that Ben and I can talk for much longer than the hour I've allotted for this show. So as you know, the Living Undeterred podcast was put together a project of mine to try to find people that are like-minded, people that have been through some either personal adversity or some traumatic event, and then are very active in putting back into the community, not only to help others, but for selfishly to help ourselves. Part of my journey has been personal healing, and I kind of figured that I couldn't help people unless I help myself first. And I think Ben Rogers would agree with that statement. So today we're going to have a great conversation. Ben is one of the first guests I've had that's actually local here, so we can spend a lot of time talking about some of the issues going on in Lynn County and Cedar Rapids specifically, but some of the issues we have in the state of Iowa. And so I'm honored to have Ben on. So Ben, I'm going to let you kind of take it from here and tell my listeners a little bit about why you think I asked you on the show, and a little bit about you. So again, thanks for being on the show, Ben.
Yeah. First of all, my first podcast. So I'm so stoked to actually join the 21st century. I feel like I'm one of the last holdouts. And when you asked me if I'd be willing to do this, it was a real honor, because I know in the time that I've gotten to know you, just how important sharing your story and allowing others to share their stories and have that kind of dialogue, the power that can have to normalize the human experience. And some of that involves trauma, that involves substance use disorders, it involves a whole host of things. So thanks for being that kind of advocate and having this platform.
Oh, you're welcome. I remember the first time I met you was at an ASAC board meeting. Full disclosure, Ben and I are actually Ben's the president of the ASAC board now, but we were at a board meeting and I recognized your name, and you know you're very well known in the community for all the work that you do. And then on Facebook, boom, I see a post that you come out with your struggles and battles, mm-hmm. and your vulnerability you had with alcoholism. And wow, my respect level went through the roof. I even get chills telling this, because I'm like, mm-hmm. how impressive it is for you to bring this out in a situation where you're a public figure. And so we'll get to that eventually, but that's how I first met you. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. I got to follow this guy's journey a little bit better. And then some of the posts you made on Facebook were just heroic, I guess, man. I don't know what else to say. I mean, to come out and talk about what you've talked about. So, I wouldn't say confidently, but just so openly, Mm-hmm. And yeah, confidently. I mean, I know alcoholism can be a minute by minute battle for many people. But I guess I'll throw that out there for you. I mean, you got so involved in all these things. Was some of that stemming from some of the issues you had with your own personal demons, I guess, and some of these things you were fighting through? You thought maybe the way to deal with this is to get involved?
Yeah, that's precisely it. It also was a way, I think, to help make sense of being a public figure struggling with something privately, mm-hmm. but recognizing what an opportunity to share that with others. And so my journey really started years ago. I mean, I was in elected office. I've been in elected office since 2009. And my drinking really kind of became an issue shortly after. I think I'd always struggled with alcohol, but it was really starting after that. And I remained very quiet about it. And I also remained very quiet about my challenges, my own brain health issues. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then on September 15th of 2014, I decided time to quit. And in fact, I had just had a therapy appointment, and I drew up a contract with my therapist, because at that time I was just going to take a 30-day breather from alcohol. I do these 30-day challenges every once in a while, like a body transformation challenge, or try and right size my diet. And I normally do well on those. Mm-hmm. But then, like most people, I revert back to my original patterns of behavior. Mm-hmm. So my therapist and I drew up a contract where I'm just going to take a 30-day break. And if I had a drink, I had to write a personal check to either Steve King Representative Steve King or
Yeah.
like Joni Ernst, people I am just politically diametrically on the opposite ends of the political spectrum.
Oh,
And the reason I would have to write a check,
I love it.
because that check would have to be disclosed, right? It would in a finance report, it would show Ben Rogers wrote a $50 check to, and it would startle people why I would give money to someone that I'm just so diametrically opposed to. I was like, oh,
that's genius, though.
I got this in the bag.
That's genius.
Yeah. So we both signed it. And I had done previous times where I'd quit for or stopped rather, for 30 days, 40 days. But then I was, within having that first sip again, I was back. My drink of choice was wine. I would go through a bottle of wine a night. And then sometimes that wouldn't do it. So I would do Heineken, right? So I was always drinking. I would go from a glass to the full bottle in just a matter of a day or two. I mean, I would revert back to just old patterns and behaviors. And so I still have that contract. And
that's awesome.
That was, September 15th of 2014. Haven't really looked back since, but really people knew my story, close friends and associates, but I'd never been really public about it. And then there was a point in time where it's you have a voice, you have a platform, and it's important for people to recognize that alcoholism, it doesn't matter if you're successful, if you have a title, if you were held a lot as a child, had all your needs and wants met, doesn't matter. And so I actually wrote that guest editorial. That was the 5th anniversary of my date of sobriety. What was really challenging, it was also about 2 months after my father had just unexpectedly passed away.
Oh, wow.
And I went to my mother to just give her a heads up. Hey, I want to celebrate this milestone, publicly disclosing my journey. Mm-hmm. And she was we were just in the early stages of grief and trauma. And it was, and alcoholism or drug addiction, while it happens to the person, the ripple effects it affects your loved ones, your family. Yeah. Some understand it and some just don't. And for my mom, that was a really difficult, because I think she wanted to protect me, right? It wasn't don't disclose it. It's there could be a lot of blowback. And I just said I have to be my own person. And I wrote it. And I remember when it came online, I broke out into sweats.
I bet.
Because I was like, it's real. It's out there. But the barrage of warmth and love and support and thank yous, and I didn't know that about you. And then people disclosing, hey, I'm an alcoholic as well, or I'm in recovery, or I understand what you're going through. I didn't do it for that. I did it to say, I'm an elected official. I've lived in this community my whole life. And, oh, by the way, this is something about me that you don't know, but I'd like to reduce stigma. It's part of the human condition. There's the remarkable thing about my story is how unremarkable it truly is. And I think we get really lost in, that we don't think that these types of conditions can affect people who have attained a certain maybe level of wealth or level of experience or a title. And it's like, no, this disease doesn't care. And so I felt I needed to do this for myself. Right. That's the only, I wanted to empower others. And it's one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Well, the interesting part of this whole conversation, Ben, is if the way people are dealing with these things is actually working, then why is every statistic with suicide, depression, alcoholism, overdose, every statistic is higher than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago? So the way that we have been dealing with these things as humans simply isn't working. And the way we've been dealing with it is to keep it inside and to not talk about it and to run around with labels on our foreheads. I love the way you said, I quit, and then you pivoted to stop. I wrote that down because I don't tell people I quit drinking. I tell people today I choose not to drink. As a matter of fact, I know the day I quit, but I don't keep score. I just, And I see now people on social media starting to kind of join this movement where there's not as many people posting the signs, I've been sober at 1,000. Because my thought was, okay, I'm not a robot. I'm a human. And I understand the game that you're told to play, like you had to write a check. I mean, I understand that part. But if you break down and you have an alcoholic beverage after 1,000 days of being sober, that doesn't make you a failure. That doesn't make you a bad person. That means you just made a really poor choice that particular moment in your life. And that's why I don't keep score. And I love the way you said you stopped. I don't even go that far. I just say I choose not to drink anymore. And
yeah,
it's kind of nice to say December 24th, 2017. And my reasons were, believe it or not, weren't for me. It was to benefit somebody else in my life I was caring about that time. Mm-hmm. But I found out for me, Ben, it was just, I didn't miss it. Yeah, I'm 55. I'm older than you, and hangovers suck. I mean, it was taking me half a day to full day to get over just having a few beers, grill a night the night before. And I'm like, I don't enjoy this. And then obviously, all these things happen in my personal life. And for me, it's been a rather easy thing to do. And I understand for some people, they wake up every day and it's a frickin' fist fight. And I can't explain it. Now, for you, is it a relatively easy thing for you to deal with?
I almost feel guilty that it's been so that for me it was a switch. And
yeah,
I'm the type of person, the way that my addictive personality works, when I get really fed up with something. I was a pack-a-day smoker in college.
Wow, I didn't know.
Yeah, I have addictive, thoughts, behaviors, and patterns. I ran track and cross country in high school. So running has been a really important part of my mental wellness, and just, it's how I run to forget. I run just to shut the world out, or I run to figure the world out. I went for a run one day and I couldn't finish it. It's one of the few times I've ever had to walk, and I was done. So I'm kind of able to flip off a switch, break the switch. But the switch will always be there. It's just not as accessible. And so, and I do a lot of Native American sweat lodges, and so do people in recovery do them. I do it at Prairie Woods, and I've met a lot of people who are in recovery, and they share stories of, it is a minute-to-minute fight, and some people are just always on the razor's edge of making that decision to use or drink. And for me, it was easy. It was, I need to be done, and I don't enjoy it anymore, and I'm not benefiting from this. But I recognize that for some other people, they struggle, and they struggle every day. And I know what it's like to have that voice in your head.
Yeah.
You just have a drink. You can do one. It's this friction. It's this weird, and some people who don't. What's been really interesting is trying to describe what it's like to alcoholism to people, and it's just sort of this internal battle. And I would always have this voice in my head where I'd be like, God, I don't want to drink today because I'm hungover, and it's a Tuesday, right? I'm hungover. I don't want to, but I know the way to silence that voice, and that's to uncork the wine, pour that first glass, that voice disappears. That friction no longer exists in my mind. And then I would get down on myself like, ugh, you have no willpower. And then I soon discovered this isn't a battle of willpower, because if that's the case, then this willpower has kept me, I've chosen not to drink now for almost 7 years. So it's not a case of willpower or lack of willpower. But it's this internal friction, and once you're able to really start dealing with it with some clarity, you recognize that you do have some power. And I want to introduce back to your book, this idea of choice versus disease.
Yeah, I thought I'd ask you about that on today.
Really, I didn't know which camp I fall in. I mean, I recognize it as a disease, but there was a choice to drink. And I'm not one of those. I never went to a 12-step program. I've never been to an AA meeting. So my journey with sobriety is very different than other people who, they have sponsor or sponsors. They attend meetings frequently. They've read Alcoholics Anonymous. It reminded me when I read this kind of like cancer is a disease.
Mm-hmm.
And you can either choose to eat junk food and live your life, and treat your body terribly on cancer, or you can choose to eat well, do what's required to kind of empower your body to try and deal with cancer as well as all the different therapeutics. That's your choice. That's your choice what to put in your body. You don't necessarily get to choose the disease, but I think you get to choose to a certain degree how you approach it.
Yeah, and you, I really appreciate the kind words you said about the book too. Before we went on air, you said some awesome comments, and that was a tough book to write. It took a year of my life, but it also pulled a lot out of me. I kind of reflect on the whole process and think of what I lost, but then think of what I've gained. The conversations I've had with people I never would have had. But going back to the disease and choice thing, Ben, and I knew at some point we were going to kind of gravitate to that, because I had a compulsive gambling problem in my 30s and 40s, and I've never talked about this publicly. And as a financial planner, I still am a licensed chartered financial consultant. I still own Premier Investments of Iowa. I don't see clients day to day, but to bring that up in my industry is a big risk. But then again, you took a risk when you talked about your alcoholism as a public figure. And I think at some point, you just kind of step up to the plate and say, okay, I'm ready to deal with these things. And by talking about those issues, I learned I had a highly addictive personality. And thank you, I never did drugs, because I would have been Len Bias, the Maryland basketball player that did cocaine the night he got drafted, and he died. I wouldn't want to do one line of coke. I would want to do all the coke. And that would be my problem with drugs. And so I've never done drugs. So I never wanted to find out if I would be addicted to drugs. But I know, like you, I have an addictive personality. So disease and choice, if I had to draw a line in the sand, I would say it's not disease versus choice, it's disease and choice. And there's always a biological activation to an addiction. So let's say I have a predisposition that my grandparents were alcoholics or my parents were. It doesn't mean I'm predetermined to drink. I still at some point have a series of choices before that bottle of alcohol hits my mouth. I can go to the store and not buy it. I can not have it in my refrigerator. There's things I can do to lead up to that. So I don't know where I stand on that, but I guess if I had the proverbial gun to my head, I would lean on more of the choice. I think we don't give our brain enough credit in how powerful it can be. And I think we're too apt to just kind of give in to the road of least resistance is to crack that beer, And there's more Ben Rogers and Jeff Johnstons out there that I guarantee you are struggling with this. But if they found the right switch, as you say, something can happen. I realized, Ben, that I wasn't that smart. So I've tricked my brain. I've got my brain to believe things that probably aren't true. And I've done that with a lot of things in my life. And so by virtue of having that approach, kind of a reframing of my life, it's a great Stoic philosophy. My blog this week's on the concept of reframing. I just love that. You take a position and you kind of turn it around and look at the same thing from a different angle, and it changes your quality of life immensely. But anyway, I just thought I would kind of jump in on that disease versus choice, because there is no answer. It's like nature versus nurture, right?
Right. And I love, like in your book, where you talk about you have the freedom or the choice. I want to find it, but it is about reframing, that you don't have to believe the story you've told yourself. You can believe differently. You can reframe your past differently. You don't have to hang on to that first or long-held belief, because it may be that it was wrong.
Right.
It's just not the way you see. It's not who you are.
Right.
And I so appreciated talking about that, where it was, you're right. One of the things, and I just got it tattooed on my arm. It's a Latin saying. It's non sum qualis eram. I was going through my divorce. I've been married once before, and I was watching I watched a lot of videos and somehow stumbled upon this one where this gentleman was talking about his favorite Roman poet Horace, and he said something like,
absolutely,
non sum qualis eram, which means I'm not as I once was, or I'm not as I am.
Right.
And I sat up in bed and I replayed it. Non sum qual saram. I'm not as I once was. And it has stuck with me my whole, that 10 years. And I finally wanted to make it permanent. But it's this idea that you're not as you once were. And that's not a bad thing. I've had to convince my wife that was not that doesn't mean I long for my youth where I could do things now. And now I'm married with kids and not as I once was. It's, whoa, I'm a father now. So I'm not as I once was.
Right.
I'm 41. So I'm not my body is not as it once was.
Right.
And the idea of we don't have to be what we've thought ourselves to be, or we think of ourselves, that there is that space for change. And then it dives also into, which I like that you touched on, it's both a Stoic philosophy and a Buddhist philosophy of impermanence, that everything
I was just going to say that word. I was just going to say that word. Yep.
Everything changes.
Right.
And I think the stories that we tell ourselves should also change, because it's probably not true. And the lens through which you look at it changes as you go through life. And I just love that. And after reading your philosophy and that about undeterred, and that's been sort of a word that has carried you since your youth, since you were young, of living undeterred and what that meant for you, I thought, what would be my word? And I didn't leave the family unfinished. Mine would be unfinished. And that's kind of part of that non sum qual saram. I'm not as I once was. I am an unfinished piece of work. But there will come a time where I will be finished. So I'm unfinished until I truly am finished. And that leaves a tremendous amount of space for me to be whomever I want to be. It allows me to look back on my life and reframe it. And it reminds me that I don't have to be anything. Mm-hmm. And I can choose I can look at myself differently. And it leaves just an incredible amount of space for growth and for reframing. And I don't have to get stuck with the idea of, I want to look a certain way. I want to think a certain way. It sort of evaporates. When you look at life that way, some of those obstacles just seem to evaporate. And
you mentioned, go ahead.
No. For me, it's sort of this, as I'm getting older, the idea of impermanence, of constant state of change, and that it sort of helps refocus my own mortality, and it makes it I'm less fearful of death. And Stoics talk about keep death in front of you. And it doesn't mean think about it all the time, but recognize that it is inevitable. You don't get to choose death. You get to choose how much you suffer. And that's in your mind, and that was in your book.
Right.
There's two things, death and suffering, and one of these we can actually change.
Right.
So keeping it in front of you that at some point this life will end. And so there are some things that you should consider important, and there are just some things that aren't.
I have so many. I mean, I have like a full page of notes. Maybe I should be a guest on your show. But this is awesome stuff, because I think you and I are so similar in a lot of our ways of thinking. And you had a epiphany moment with this quote from Horace, and I'm thinking to myself, my moment, my one phrase that really changed my life was in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah. And anybody that follows my story, I quote this like it's it's one of the probably the best, most impactful book I've ever read in my life. And he says, suffering is my opportunity. And what I was at a poolside, and my son was golfing, and I'm reading Man's Search for Meaning, and just like you popped out of bed, I just saw suffering is my opportunity. I'm like, holy shit, that's it. That's the phrase I've been looking for. And this was after my son had died. I'm looking for to get me to turn this, to reframe this pain that I had losing a child to heroin, and then just limit my suffering, kind of compartmentalize it. And I rephrased it, Ben, to pain is unavoidable, suffering is a choice. And so that's my mantra as I go out and speak to groups or I do interviews. I say pain is unavoidable, but suffering is a choice. And I firmly believe that. Seth's death was, in all sense of purposes, if you're a believer of fate, then obviously it was unavoidable. I'm not a believer of faith. I believe fate. I believe it was a part of his level of bad choices he made, and it caught up with him. But again, if you can look at the death, the act of death, as something, it happens to all of us, and he was on a road where that probability was high when you're dancing with those things. In that, when that actually happened, I was on like two roads I talked about in my book, Ben, that chapter, two roads. I told the boys we have two roads to go down. You could do the two roads with everything in your life. You're looking at a beer, and you're an alcoholic. I have two roads to go down. I can crack open that beer and I know what the road's going to be like. I know exactly what's going to happen. Shame, guilt, regret, anger, or I can choose not to. And I know what that road's going to be like as well. So in advance what the probable outcomes on these roads. But then why do we keep making the wrong choices? And that's kind of where I'm trying to get this a little dialed down so we can, all my guests, all the people that have been on this Living Undeterred journey of mine, we can get together and try to help people. This is Mental Health Awareness Month. And, Ben, you've been a massive advocate for many things in regards to mental health, but there's a big one, the Lynn County Access Center, that is something I want to kind of segue into. Why don't you explain where this idea came from? I think I know. There's 3.7 million people in treatment right now, and there's 14,000 treatment facilities. So there's a lot of people hurting. There's a lot of people who need places to go get help. But how did this Lynn County Access Center come about? Where did the idea come from? And I know you guys just had your opening, and how is it going right now in regards to you guys opening? And why don't you take it a little bit from here and explain exactly what the Lynn County Access Center is? And again, it's an awesome thing you guys are doing there.
Thank you so much for that. So for your listeners, a mental health access center is not something that is new nationally. They're almost in every state. It's a new service in Iowa. And essentially, it is a 24/7, 365 service. And the vast majority of them are voluntary. You can walk in, you can be referred to treat a crisis situation, a mental health crisis, or a substance use disorder. And many times, and oftentimes, people seek treatment for either a crisis or their substance use by going to the emergency room because the community they live in may not have a robust service, a lot of service providers like we're lucky to have here in Cedar Rapids. So people come in contact with law enforcement. Law enforcement says, what you're doing is not enough to go to jail, and you're not sick enough to go to hospital, like into a psychiatric ward. But if we're going to divert you, where can we safely divert you to?
Right.
The answer to that question is a mental health access center. And so what we did here in Lynn County is we were sort of the stars aligned, sort of fate and opportunity, or just opportunity and seizing on it. We had a bunch of mental health dollars that had to be spent. We had a Lynn County building that was vacant that used to be a public health building that's right next to the community mental health center. And we had several service providers that said, we're on board. And those providers are Area Substance Abuse Council, Foundation 2, who does like mobile crisis outreach, the Penn Center, which is a subsidiary of Abbey Community Mental Health. And it really sort of became this, let's change how we treat and assist people who find themselves in crisis, who don't have the coping mechanisms or the skills at that time to deal with whatever it is that they're dealing with. And that going to the emergency room is the most costly form of treatment and oftentimes the most inappropriate form of treatment.
Right.
And certainly jail is the wrong place to go if what you're dealing with is a mental health crisis.
And most
but there was no real, and most are, and there was no real in between. And so we dedicated a tremendous amount of resources to this creation of a mental health access center in coordination and cooperation with these 4 providers. And we were able to, in less than 4 years from sort of this idea, conceiving of, hey, we have these dollars, let's use them to create this service. And then we found a building. And then the question was, is this model sustainable given Iowa, how Iowa funds mental health and reimburses counties and providers and at the level in which they provide them. And we almost said, we'll figure out if it's sustainable later. Let's build the airplane first. Yeah. And then we'll figure out how to maintain it once it's in the air. And that's what we did. And in less than 4 years, there is now a brand new service that's open. So people can walk in or be referred by law enforcement or the hospitals, and they can go in. If they just need a few hours to de-escalate, there's a service available for them. If they need to get out of the situation that they're in for 3 to 5 days, they can do that. If they are building up the courage to finally tackle or address their substance use disorder and they need to detox, they can do that at the Mental Health Access Center. And the best part is there's also other services that if you need longer term, the Access Center will direct them to these longer term services. And then they do all the follow-up to ensure, hey, did you get the level of service you need? What else can be provided for you? And it's a revolving door. If you need to come back the next day, come back. There's no limit to how many times you can come in for these services.
So Ben, in looking at my personal situation, I'm sure there's people watching this that have a child that is possible candidate to using these services. I go back to when Seth had his issues, at 15, and then when he actually had overdosed once and was in the ER, and then got released. And I called ASAC, I think on a Friday. I write about this in my book, and I said,
"Yeah,
my son."
Powerful.
And I didn't know who to. Ben, I didn't know if I needed to call the police. I didn't know if I needed to call the fire department, a psychologist, an emergency. I had no idea. As many dads are and moms, there's no template out there. There's no
right.
Oh, here's step one, do this, and it's like all I was doing was making up stuff on the fly. Well, I called ASAC. They didn't have a bed. I said my son's going to be dead by Monday if I don't get a bed. Well, they called right back like within an hour, and I got him in. That was my first experience on this process, this arduous process of trying to find out where to put my son. I couldn't take care of him. I'm just a dad, man. I'm not licensed or certified in any of these things. So is this now where I would have put Seth?
So right now, this service is for adults.
Okay.
But we are actually working on trying to create a juvenile, whether it's a physical location or it's a different type of service for children, because hopefully children become adults. And certainly
what age are adults?
18.
Okay.
And it just has to do with mixing certain populations together, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you're in crisis and you're in substance.
Yep.
So, but we wouldn't turn away someone if they had their kids with them. Like, I'm in a domestic violence situation. I'm in crisis. I have my kids. We'll figure that out. So it's not like, well, you have children. You need to leave them at the front door. You can come in. But like you, I mean, I've had some loved ones and friends who I've loved who had substance abuse issues that back in the 90s and early 2000s, same sort of thing of there's no blueprint for this if you're encountering it for the first time and don't know where to turn. And so you naturally turn to the hospital. In fact, there's a community group called Crush, and I think it's like communities.
It
has to do with
heroin,
opioids, right?
Yeah,
opioids and heroin.
Yep.
It's communities resilient to stopping heroin, united in stopping heroin. And I was invited to sit in a group setting and to really learn about the program. And one of the family members who was there with their child talked about when they finally discovered that their child was doing heroin. And they said, here we are, oblivious to the fact that our child was doing this, and now we've become aware. And we thought we could just simply go to the hospital, drop them off. They'll go into detox, and we'll pick them up 30 days later. And everyone in the room just kind of started giggling and laughing.
Yeah.
Because they knew that's not the reality. And the parents didn't feel that those people were laughing at them because they were laughing with them. They were just like, we thought we could just go to the hospital. And everyone just started laughing like, yeah, no. But for many people, they just get swallowed up in this where do I take my loved one? And
Right.
I read in your book that passage about calling up my son will not be alive
Right.
in the next 24, 48 hours. And you write about, I don't know who made the decision or who they had to talk to, but they got him in. And you almost think, what if someone didn't? If they didn't
Yeah.
make that call, or if they couldn't have gotten
Right.
that staff member to say, we'll make it work.
Right.
And people find themselves powerless. They don't know where to turn. And it's no fault of their own. It's just, and I think Ben Carson said it in here, and
Mm-hmm.
I really sort of appreciate it. We should have as many treatment centers as there are
Yeah.
patients, or something like that. It was a really
Yeah,
profound,
yep.
like,
It's like the accessibility needs to be as easy as it is to get the drugs or something like that.
That's it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
which was just spot on.
We need to
It
make
was
treatment as
spot on.
easy. Yeah, spot
Yep.
on. We need to
Yep.
make treatment as accessible and easy as getting the drugs.
Right.
You're darn right. But parents and loved ones have to jump through tremendous hoops. They have to call in, and say they will die. They will
Yeah,
not be
that's what I
alive by
did.
the next time we
Yep.
have this conversation. And it is that we don't have a lot of beds available. We don't have a ton of services. And it is sometimes I think that families it's the Hunger Games. May the odds be in your favor. Good luck.
Yeah. And Ben, I've done a lot of thinking about this as I was kind of designing this Living Undeterred project. It's like, you probably have the same observation in what you're doing. We can't save everyone. And where is my attention most needed or most focused or most effective? And I've got to the point where I think where I'm going to be putting in most of my time is with the kids, because kind of the pre-habituation, kind of instead of rehab, get into prehab. Instead of taking a 40-year-old housewife that drinks 2 bottles of wine and trying to get her to go to meetings and change behavior, maybe if we can get to these 40-year-old housewives or husbands before they become these people and go back to 7th grade. The age of first use is 14 in the United States. 14 years old, which how I opened my book was a conversation I had at Prairie with a young man that came up to me and told me he had been in rehab and was, I think, possibly he'd been a patient at ASAC too. I don't remember his whole story, but he did tell me quite a bit. But anywho, 14 and he'd been in rehab. And I thought, wow. I mean, the stats say that if you can get through 18 without having addiction issues, you have this 82% probability of never having problems with substance abuse the rest of your life if you can get through the age of 18. So I know that where you're spending a majority of your time, and where probably most of society is working with the people that really need the help right now. And that's obviously well needed. I'm thinking more of in the next couple years of trying to design programs where I can get into the kids and we can get in front of these kids before they become alcoholics. And with the combination of both, then we can maybe get that age 18 threshold and get some of these kids to punch through and get the next generation of ambassadors and not people that are in treatment all the time, because there's no question the easiest way to quit something is to never start. And that sounds so, old fashioned, like, well, yeah, I know that, Jeff, but the reality is it's true. For every kid in 7th grade that decides not to vape, or decides not to, drink alcohol at a football game, that's one more kid that has a chance to get through the age of 18. And that's a higher probability that one child won't have a problem with substance abuse. So you're right. It's a game of numbers in a way. It is a mathematical challenge we're up against. But let me ask you another question, Ben. This has been on my mind to ask you all day. What's your thoughts on legalization of marijuana? And where do you see this as a potential tipping point for kids, primarily for adolescents, going forwards? Do you see it as a problem?
So first, I think that's a great question. I'm where I am in my life now, and I think I would have said this probably in my youth as well, is that we have legalization of alcohol, of gambling, of cigarettes and other vices. I don't really see necessarily marijuana as any different, better, or worse than alcohol, tobacco. I see it really as states are doing it to generate revenue.
Absolutely.
And certainly like gambling, there's always going to be a percentage of the population that will become addicted. Same with cigarettes, same with alcohol.
Right.
So I do see it as states looking to diversify revenue streams. How can we fix roads? How can we improve our schools? And states that do this, obviously the way that they sell it is that they tax it at a very high rate, and then treatment providers come in and say, there's got to be money for treatment. If you're going to do this, you're going to do it. But at least we have to increase prevention, awareness, and treatment. And so I do see it as kind of a wave that's happening that I'm not saying it's unstoppable, but almost every state around us, Minnesota, Illinois, pretty soon probably Missouri and Nebraska will pass legalized recreational marijuana. And Iowa will either be a holdout or eventually that day will come. And I recognize that I have an addiction to alcohol, but that doesn't mean that no one should be able to drink alcohol. And I recognize that there are people that they start using their gateway or they may enter into using marijuana, and then it may escalate or not. That if we're going to do this, that I would certainly want money to go towards treatment. And I mean, with the legalization of marijuana, it's not for me necessarily now it becomes available. We stop incarcerating people for nonviolent criminal offenses it relates to this drug. So for me, it's more of we really need to change how we're prosecuting people that change the trajectory of their life. It makes it harder for them to get into apartments, to get a mortgage, to get jobs. It just cripples, and then they get sucked into this vortex. And so for me, primarily, we need to change how we are prosecuting people. And also, if it's going to be recreational, then we need to make sure that people have the ability to then seek treatment. That Ben Carson model. If it's easy to get marijuana, it should be very easy then to get some kind of treatment, or that parents can have prevention tools that actually speak to their children and not speak at them, but speak to them. Yeah. I guess if you're asking me, I'm not opposed to recreational marijuana being passed. It has to come with treatment dollars, like when for cigarettes they peel off a certain portion for nicotine addiction and awareness. Same thing with alcohol.
Right.
So I recognize that I have an addiction to substance and chemicals. There is a good argument to be made that other states and federally we're having conversations about legalizing it for recreational medicinal use, and certainly you need to have a treatment component attached to it so that people who do struggle with it can at least get into some type of treatment or get some kind of assistance.
It goes back again, talking to our kids. You mentioned, drinking and smoking and all that. And marijuana is just going to be added to that list of legal things here shortly. Mm-hmm. But as I tell a lot of the kids I speak to in some of my presentations, is just because something's legal doesn't mean you have to do it. And
right.
And that I think I was talking to a couple 20-year-olds. My son's 20, or soon to be in 3 days, Ian, and he had some of his friends over, and they were talking about going out to Vegas when they're 21 and celebrating their stuff. And then I asked them, I said, "What do you guys think about legalized marijuana?" And they're like, well, they told me what I would expect they're going to say to an adult, But it was interesting how the way they were saying it was almost like they weren't saying what I just said, that just because it's legal, you don't have to do it. They were more like they were compelled to, now that it is legal, that it's a weird way how they worded it. And I thought to myself, I think for some kids, they think when they're 21 that they have to go out and drink, because now they're, quote, legal. Well, marijuana is the same thing. Just because it comes legal, I think as parents, we have to tell our kids, so what? For you individually, it's a non-event. I mean, it's a meaningless event when marijuana becomes. They could legalize every drug. It could be on every street corner for free, Ben. I still wouldn't do it at 55 years old. It could be free. I wouldn't do it. But not everybody has the Ben Rogers, Jeff Johnston switch, and you and I both are admitted addiction candidates, but we both have this internal switch. So let me ask you another question about harm reduction. I'm not an expert in this area by far, but I've run into a lot of people on specifically on LinkedIn, some advocates for harm reduction. And I think to myself, if there would have been a label on the heroin needle that Seth put in his arm, or if the dealer could have tested it, which obviously, these are pipe dreams, but I'm thinking to get to Mars, you have to have a freaking pipe dream, right? You got to have a goal that's impossible at some point. Do you think we'll ever reach a point where we'll be able to test heroin on the street? So at least someone could get high and not be putting, fentanyl in their system and not get a second chance. I mean, this sounds terrible from a dad who lost his son to heroin, but I'm not going to go out and catch all the people selling drugs. But I definitely think I can get to people before they do it. But how about the people already using it? Do you think we'll ever get there?
I hope so. I hope that we get to a place like other countries, really progressive countries, where they have needle exchange programs, recognizing that people are going to do this. So let's ensure if they're going to do it, that they do it in a safe environment. They're not sharing needles. They're not throwing it, disposing of needles in parks where children are playing.
Absolutely.
That if they're going to do a drug, I think this is the first time where I've heard, the testing ability to do it and be like, oh yeah, this has fentanyl in it.
Yeah.
Or this is, there's other substances in here that it sort of helps people do it more responsibly, because they're going to do it. You may not be able to stop them doing it. What you really want them to do is, if they're going to do it in a manner that's safe. But then you can also be in an environment where you can talk to them and approach them and say, have you thought about sobriety? Have you thought about detoxing? Because I think I've never been an addict like on heroin or meth or even alcohol, where it's the withdrawal is this, or the sickness that comes with the withdrawal. And I've read a lot of stories of people who for heroin or opioids, where they're like, it's the sickness that I don't want to feel that level of sick. The withdrawals scare me to death. And that's the reason why I don't want to quit. So you create an environment where you can at least talk with them and approach them, and then have a variety of services to help people wean or get off of the drug. But if we just treat them like criminals, or just say, this is bad what you're doing, it's illegal, we're going to arrest you, you're not dealing with the problem. And the problem really is trying to do harm reduction, allowing for the safe exchange of needles. Or if someone's overdosing, creating an incentive for them to call the police, instead of, like, if they have dope all around, they're not going to call the police to come in. If there was, and that's part of harm reduction, that, if police enter into a place where someone is called and they've overdosed, that they're not going to arrest the other people for the paraphernalia. There's a medical condition here. We need to deal with that. Yeah. Creating a culture where people are like, someone is dying in my house. I'm calling you because I don't want them to die, but I have needles and heroin or meth so I don't know. It's going to take a substantial culture change, a lot of political change, and a lot of understanding of what is harm reduction. Because I think it's very easy for people to be dismissive of addicts and just saying, if you really wanted to be done with it, you would be done with it. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps,
I mean, look what happened in the elections when Biden's son came out. And I won't even get down this road, but some people on the other side kind of used it as, well, that's a reflection of being a poor dad or whatever. I mean, it's just like, are we still in the dark ages on this stuff? I mean, are we still going to take a human being and blame the parents or the environment for the way the choices this kid made? I mean, that is just beyond belief for me, but it shouldn't be, because we're just in a society of people that are just completely ignorant to these things until it becomes personal.
Comes to their doorstep. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like Jeff Johnston, I become very passionate. But I wouldn't be doing this right now if Seth wouldn't have died of heroin. So I get that part. But yeah, we just label them as problems and addicts and throw away the key, and or well, why test their drugs? They're just going to die anyway. They're just going to do it anyway. And I'm like, I was talking to an addict the other day, Ben, and he had been through, I think, 4 or 5 facilities, fell off the wagon a dozen times, and now he's in his 60s, and he hasn't had anything for 10 years. So it is possible to fall off the wagon a dozen times and to live to be 60 and have a productive life. So we can't give up on that person that falls off the wagon many, many times. However, there is some accountability. At some point, that gentleman had that switch turn on. So what is that switch? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And I will tell you, as we kind of have another 10, 15 minutes to go, meditation's been a big thing for me, Ben. Healthy eating's been a big thing for me. Exercising. I don't have ability to go run because of some knee and back problems, but I run on my elliptical, and I normally watch podcasts on topics like this. So I can increase my well-being physically, but I'm not watching, 5 hours of TikTok videos. I'm watching a productive conversation of 2 highly intelligent people on a passionate topic. And so I can really kill 2 birds with 1 stone right there. But for me, those have been some of my coping mechanisms: reading obsessively, writing, speaking, my blogs, my podcasts, meditation, eating healthy. Did I miss anything in there that you practice that you would like to maybe add to the arrow, add an extra arrow to the quiver of people out there that are looking for ways to, fight through this every day?
You and I are soul brothers in a lot of ways.
I know we are. It's crazy.
I'm big into mindfulness meditation. I try and eat well and exercise. I'm attracted to really intelligent debates in which you can learn different perspectives on an issue. I try not. I don't even know what TikTok is, to be honest with you, and I don't spend time looking at those videos. But you really were onto something about, we talk about statistics and we use labels like addict or drug, and we forget that there are humans, and this is part of what it means to. There's a human condition here, and part of for me that was sort of enlightening is that giving myself some grace and some self-compassion and not being so hard on myself that I drank a lot. It ruined some relationships. It squandered some opportunities, but it was also the greatest teacher of my life. Some of the failures have been the greatest teachers of my life. That we have to remind ourselves that at the end of the day, we're human beings. We're imperfect and unfinished, and to give ourselves some grace that we will make bad decisions, and we may not understand the consequences right away, or maybe we're fully aware of the consequences and do them anyways. That we have to give others who are struggling, at the very least, you may not understand what they're going through, but you can empathize, that you can see that they're going through something that's very difficult. And I haven't met a lot of addicts who have said, I love being an alcoholic. I love being addicted to drugs. I love not seeing my children because of the court order, or I love going to treatment. They all recognize that this is not how. They didn't wake up one day and think, I want to be a drug addict. Life has happened to them. And having some compassion towards that human condition and not being dismissive or instantly label them as a drug addict. I have a name. I have a family. I have a story. And that's important to understand. And it's easy. It's great to do that one-on-one. It's hard to do that when you think of things collectively. But I think that's really the power of getting to know someone and their story, or at least understanding that it may be easy for you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but the person who's the addict may not even have boots. So don't just think that because something worked for you, that it's going to work for someone else, or that you gave up something, they should be able to as well. And there is no silver bullet, but having some compassion and empathy towards other people and the circumstances that they find themselves in can actually go a long ways to maybe helping that person feeling and being seen, that they're not invisible, that their problems are not invisible, and that there are people out there who really do care and love them despite having these issues.
there are two main ways to change human behavior, and the two ways are to inspire or to scare. And I've got some friends that I know in my circle that have been told by a doctor that if they ever drink again, they'll be dead. Well, that's not an inspirational thing. That's scare, and it works. I mean, these people a lot of them end up quit drinking. But the inspiration part is where I like to try to focus on, just because I'm an eternal optimist. So I run into issues, Ben, being too optimistic, where people say, well, Jeff, I can't talk to you because you've just seemed to somehow be Teflon in this thing. And you just seem to things just, and I'm like, well, that's the perception. But you didn't see me at 3 a.m. laying on the floor crying my guts out, you know. You didn't see me after Seth died considering suicide, you know. You didn't see that. You see now, you see all this stuff I'm doing, but it took a lot of work for me to get where I'm at. It takes daily work for me to stay where I'm at, because I know the lure to get pulled back into the road of least resistance, Ben, is to not do the podcast, is to not write a second book, is to not, have some other ideas that I have that are in my brain that I want to get out there to help people. That's a road full of resistance, right? That's difficult. But that's kind of how I am. And I know there's people out there that just haven't found the right thing yet to get that switch turned on. We all have a switch. And I think at the end of the day, finding your why, what is your why? My why is extremely clear, concise, repeatable, and consistent. My why is 3 things: to help me first, to keep me alive. My number one why is selfish. I don't want to die yet. Second why is to honor my son, Seth. And the third why is to help others. So people look at me thinking, well, Jeff, you're out there helping all these people. Yeah, but you know what? By talking to Ben for an hour, I became a better person today. I became a better human being today in the conversation we had. And that benefited me, that when I get off this conversation, I'm going to go finish a blog that I didn't want to do yesterday. So these little steps are what I'm finding out is what helps me get through my day. So everybody listening to this that's battling something, and I've had 3 guests on my show, Ben, that have been women that have been sexually abused. And I know there's plenty of men out there that have been sexually abused. That's a whole different set of trauma than dealing with giving up alcohol. Bearing a child is a whole different set of trauma than giving up alcohol. Right. They're not any better or worse. They're just different. So part of my motivation, Ben, is to help people find their why, So what's your why?
Wow. It's a very simple question, and the answers can be profound. I try and think of my why. And I think ultimately it's to help others, but it's recognizing, it's having a purpose. And I really love in your book, I want to kind of get back to it because it'll help me sort of answer your question. And I've heard it in a lot of other scenarios as well about the, when they do the safety check on an airline, when they put your mask on before helping others, you have to be able, in order to help other people in that scenario, you have to have your mask on first. Now, my instant reaction would be, I got to get them on my kids. But if I'm not whole, if I'm not healthy, if I'm not capable and able, they won't survive that, right? So it's there is that selfishness of I need to take care of myself first, because then that allows me to take care of others. My why is sort of I want to find the ripple, right? I want to be that little pebble that drops in the water and creates that ripple to impact others. And how far can those ripples go? And it's sometimes it's just being that pebble. And
I'm laughing for a reason, Ben. I'm laughing for a reason. You said we're soul brothers. This is my only tattoo.
Yeah.
And it's water here, and it's the pebble hitting the water, and this is the living in the moment symbol. And the date here is 10/4/16 in Roman numerals. So that's the date of Seth's death. Roman numerals represents my son Roman. That's his first name. Mm-hmm. Plus, Roman and I scuba dive, so the blueness gets darker as you go into the ocean. And then this represents living in the moment. And then the middle is a golf ball. Represents my son Ian golfing. So I've got all three of my boys in here. And I had a friend of the family that designed this, that grew up with us and knows Seth. And so to me, when you said pebbles, I'm like, you just proved that we are soul brothers. Yeah, I have a tattoo that says living in the moment, you know?
Yeah, and that's sort of, and I need to refine my why, and my why is unfinished, right? So, but it is really dedicated towards helping myself and others. And I also scuba dive. I scuba dived with my father. We both got certified together. I haven't dived in a while, but you and I'm so happy we've connected in ways. I don't think we would have crossed paths if it wasn't for what's happened in your life.
Right.
I'm just reminded and in awe of sometimes the small, insignificant, inconsequential decisions that lead people to meet, to events unfold, and you look back and think, how did I get here? And it's just a series of events that we either have control or not. I've read your book, and I was just like, we both meditate. Viktor Frankl's book is on my desk. His quote about the silence between two thoughts, between stimulus and response, and that gap that to me gives me goosebumps thinking about it all the time.
Right.
It's just, I so appreciate someone like you who offers themselves to the world through their vulnerability and also displaying their strength, but saying that strength comes with a lot of self-care and vulnerability and heartache. But I've also built myself up to be, and you say you've always, it's not something newfound, and even if it was newfound, it'd be wonderful. But you've always been an optimist, and I think most people aren't necessarily wired that way, and it may be uncomfortable for them. But it's always amazing to be around people who see the light, or through a lens or a perspective that other people just may not see. It's a wonderful presence to be around, Jeff. It's your ultimate gift. And this has just been one of the best uses of an hour I've ever had.
Well, I'm very excited to get this out there and replay this and rebroadcast it. And I had a new acquaintance of mine, and I've only known him for a couple of weeks. And he's just been one of these people you meet, Ben, that you feel like you went to high school with. You know, and I kind of feel that way with you. I feel that way with you, but I've known you for a couple of years, But this guy said, Jeff, after I got to kind of know your story a little bit, and I've met other people like you that have lost, like Steve Grant, for example. He's lost his only two boys, and he's been on my show before. And he said, you found a way to become a better man, not a bitter man. And I thought, wow, that's another goosebump phrase that I have now written on my wall above my computer. Jeff, you're a better man, not a bitter man. So someone asked me, well, you had the worst thing possible happen to you. I'd rather have had stage 4 cancer and died to have Seth still here. I would give that up in 2 seconds. But that didn't happen. So how did I figure out a way, if I did yet? I'm still constantly learning, and I have, I step back a lot. Then I just have to make sure I take more steps forward than I am stepping back, But that phrase Mike said was like, man, that is so true. And so no matter what someone's been through, there's an individual on my podcast named Danielle McLean that you need to go back and listen to some of my podcasts, Ben. Mm-hmm. She was had raped at 16, drug addict, incarcerated, prostitution, all the reasons why she could have just given up on life and probably killed herself. Yet she went back to college in her 30s, got an engineering degree, and now she runs her own aerospace engineering company. Yeah, I mean, so it makes my story look like nothing. It's like, I can't even fathom what it's like to be sexually molested. So people have been down that road. They have a whole different view on adversity and living undeterred. People can say, well, Jeff, I understand your pain. I'm like, no, you don't. Until you've lost a child, you cannot understand. Yet I can't understand what it's like to be sexually molested because I never have been. So I need to make sure when I talk to people that have had traumatic, events, that I can frame it in a way where I'm not saying, well, I understand, like brushing it off.
Right.
I don't understand. Tell me, make me understand what it's like, because I don't know what it's like. And that's what I think people going through trauma want to hear. They don't want to hear, oh, you got this, Ben. You're a tough guy, Ben. Go to church and pray to your God, Ben. He'll take care of you. It's like people don't want to hear that. They want to tell their story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And they want to do it on their terms as well. And I think because people are not well versed in how to deal with someone who's grieving or who's gone through a traumatic event, oftentimes I think they say things to make themselves feel better. Right. Like I lost my father, and anyone who's lost like a loved one, they'll say, like, oh, it happened for a reason, or you'll be better. Are you okay? That's the worst thing is, are you okay? It's like, no, I'm
right.
We're just not, we just don't know the language of grief and trauma and how you want to sort of sympathize with them. And it's like, you don't know what I'm going through. But it kind of comes back to that empathy and self-compassion and compassion towards others. Like, I may not know what you're going through, but I can empathize as another human being that what you've gone through is something I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. And it's also something I don't understand. So help me learn. Absolutely. I can't say, I know what you've gone through. No, you don't. You have literally no idea. And even if someone has a similar experience, we all go through trauma very differently, in grief and how fluid grief and trauma is. And so I think you've keyed in on something really, really important, and that's facilitating conversations so that people can tell their story, and so that others who have, I'll never know what it's like to have been like that woman you just described, going through all those life events. I will never understand that.
Right.
I will never have the capacity to, but I know that I have the capacity to love. And I know that I have the capacity to listen and want to hear someone teach me about what they've gone through. I'll never be able to understand it, but at least I'll be able to know and understand their story and how they've become who they are because of that. So I think a lot of it is conversations to help people better listen and not immediately jump to, I have a solution, or you're going to be fine, or you seem like a really great person, you have a great family, this is just a bump in the road. It's like, then you've just dismissed me. You've just dismissed all of my issues. And I think being dismissed is one of the worst feelings.
It's crazy. We're an hour and 7 minutes. I told you we'd have no problem talking about stuff. This is great. Again, it's my podcast. I can go as long as I want. But one thing I want to tell you that's worked with me with mindfulness meditation, that I kind of an exercise that I got. And I practiced this the other day at a meeting when I had 6 people on a table. Because what do we do in a meeting? We don't normally kind of think of what people are looking at. What do we look like? How's my hair? Is that zit on my chin still? Is my shirt wrinkled? And an exercise I've been working on, Ben, is look around that room and look at each person for a while and think to myself, I wonder what their stuff is. I wonder what their story, I wonder what problems they have right now today. So I'm changing the frame from not all about me at the meeting, but going around the room slowly, taking 5 minutes of looking at each people. Are they still married? Are they going through a divorce? Do they have children? Are their parents sick? Are they happy with their job? Are they fighting with their spouse? And you play this little game with each people, and you instantaneously remember that we're all freaking the same. And at the end of the day, we're not in a canoe going across the ocean fighting our individual battles. We're in a freaking massive boat with millions of people, and we all have the same problems. Some are just a little more, magnified than others, but we're all in this together. And that's where I think a good place to wrap this up. One thing I want to ask you is, where can people reach you? I know on LinkedIn, that's probably, and Facebook is where I see you the most. And what's the next stage for you? What are some of your aspirations coming up?
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to have people reach out to me. So certainly Facebook under Ben Rogers, or LinkedIn. They can contact me at the Board of Supervisors at Ben jeff.rogers, Rogers, at lynncounty.org. They can call me on my personal cell phone, 319-573-8295. And I give out my cell phone's publicly available, and I love talking with people about any issue on anything. And so what's next for me? As a financial advisor, you'll find this funny. Plan A is the Powerball.
Yeah.
And I don't have a plan B yet.
Cross off. Oh, well, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You'll make it up as you go.
I'll make it up as I go. My aspirations are to continue in this role as long as as people will have me, or as long as I can be effective, because I really want to, I want to create a new homeless shelter in Cedar Rapids. So I'm really invested in homeless issues, creating a children's system for mental health that gives parents and juveniles and children a gateway into either prevention or treatment or some kind of mental health access center for children. And I really aspire just to be a good, reliable, safe father for my children, a good husband. I'm a son to a wonderful mother, and my aspirations are really to just continue sort of what my grandfather. So my grandfather's over this shoulder, and my father's over this shoulder. Uh-huh. And my grandfather used to ask my father and his my aunt and uncle, when they were growing up, what did you do to make the world a better place today? Or what did you do to make this sliver of the universe that you live in a better place? And my dad actually, he expected an answer. And my dad then asked my brother and I that, and that sort of stayed with me. And it's sort of an open question. It's, what am I doing today to make this world that I live in, this little sliver of the universe I occupy, a better place? And that's my aspiration and goals, because it's not achieving some level of professional credentials or some office or some job title or some salary. Those are all great, but it is, what am I doing to make this world a better place for my children, and more importantly, for other people's children? Because it's not just about myself. Muhammad Ali had the best poem. It's considered one of the shortest poems in history. In 1968, he was giving the commencement address to Harvard. And Muhammad Ali was famous for a lot of his poetry, or a lot of rhyming, particularly when he would want to get in his opponent's heads. And so someone yelled out, "Give us a poem, Muhammad." And he sat there for a second and he said, "Me, we." And it's something that's guided me. It's about ourselves, but also the collective. And so my aspiration is to always sort of maintain that focus of trying to improve myself and that of other people that I've never met.
Well, I know you enjoyed my book, and I'm looking forward to reading your book someday.
Right on. I'm going to read this book again. I devoured it. I loved it. You and I we both like Stoicism and Buddhism, and we have similar life philosophies. But as I wrote to you, this was so honest and raw and inspiring that I could see how a book like this can be transformational, not only for the person writing it, but for the person reading it. That you don't have to know someone who's died of a tragic overdose.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of great life lessons in here, and your 12 daily steps I thought were phenomenal, and some of them I'm incorporating into my life. And certainly, never waste a good failure, and have goals, but not at the expense of living in the moment. Don't forget about what's in front of you right now. And Jeff, I can't thank you enough for sharing Seth's story, your story, your children, and just being who you are has really given me and others, I think, a lot of source of strength.
Well, I know people watching this will be moved as well. Well, listen, man, I have enjoyed this immensely. I never know how these are going to go when I start them, but I value your friendship, and I'm in awe of what you're doing, not just personally, but the civic involvement and how you're trying to change lives is something to be admired. And I think people coming up, you have definitely kind of set that template out there that it's okay to be a public figure and to be vulnerable at the same time. But well, listen, I'll let you go. Thanks again for being on the Living Undeterred podcast, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you shortly. So again, thanks a lot, Ben Rogers, for being a guest.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.